Is there a part of our history and nature that we're not allowed to know?
Yeah.
That is the crux of the matter. The cover-up is not just about secrecy or hoarding data and not releasing it. It's about making a decision that nobody in the world has consented to that facilitates us being in the dark about the nature of reality. It translates to, we have the data, we have the knowledge, you're not allowed to know. This is not relevant to you. This is not important to you. If we thought it was important to you, we'd give you the information, but we don't. They're basically playing God. They are controlling our destiny by withholding information that would influence our destiny inevitably. So Vice News put out a great video published on August 28th, 2025 with host Shane Smith. The show is called Shane Smith Has Questions. And he interviewed Jeremy Corbell. And it really opens the door to deep conversation about the cover-up and the implications of the cover-up, the consequences of the cover-up. So let's dive deep into this interview.
So the elephant in the room is that our government didn't say nothing to see here, move on this time.
Wow, okay.
And that's
well, what do they say?
What they admitted is that UFOs are real, that there are craft that do things that we can't explain, that we need, like an alcoholic, you need to admit there's a problem before you can start working on a solution. They've admitted UFOs are real. Officially, our government has told you UFOs are real, that we don't know how or who, we have suspect how they might operate, but we don't know who's operating them. So everybody's been told, but they didn't hear it. That is official. But that's where it stops.
I agree and disagree with Jeremy Corbell regarding that statement, but it is complex. Before I convey the parsing that I have on whether the U.S. government truly acknowledged that some UFOs are technological mysteries well beyond anything we have, I'll share some other people's statements that echo what Jeremy Corbell stated. So on May 22nd, 2024, former Colonel Carl Nell basically said the same thing when he was on the iSalt Connections platform. Let's play that clip.
Anybody paying attention realizes the government has already indicated that unidentified anomalous phenomena are real, they're not ours, and they're not our adversaries. The Pentagon has said that. Like, for people that are paying attention, like, that shoe already dropped. So for a lot of people, they think that the second shoe to drop is, this is non-human intelligence, and maybe the conversation stops there. Like, the president comes out and says, there's non-human intelligence. The truth is that will precipitate this crescendo of other questions that maybe the government's not ready to answer, that will court, if not precipitate, potential negative ramification for society.
On some level, what Carl Nell stated there is accurate, but it's not entirely cut and dry, and I'll explain what I mean as we proceed. Now let's cover something that Robert Hastings said, similar to both Jeremy Corbell and former Colonel Carl Nell. So the Office of the Director of National Intelligence Preliminary Assessment on Unidentified Aerial Phenomena was published on June 25th, 2021. And Robert Hastings, the individual that literally wrote the book on the UFO and nuke connection, wrote an article that was published in the Washington Examiner on July 2nd, 2021. And he echoes what Jeremy Corbell said about this so-called admission by the U.S. government. Here's an article titled, written by Robert Hastings. I literally wrote the book on the UFO nuclear connection. Why is the government hiding what it knows? Let's dig into the first segment very quickly. The U.S. government's recent unidentified flying objects report is unprecedented. It acknowledges for the first time that some UFOs, or what the U.S. government refers to as unidentified aerial phenomena, appear to be real, ultra-advanced craft of unknown origin. Going back 70 years, virtually every statement by the U.S. military had dismissed the phenomenon as misidentified known objects, such as weather balloons or optical illusions or hoaxes, but simply Put simply, the new report is a major departure from the past policy of denial and obfuscation. But that candor goes only so far. The report completely ignores the elephant in the room. Hundreds of reports from military veterans, most of whom I have interviewed myself, involving UFO activity at nuclear weapons sites, including the mysterious disabling of our intercontinental ballistic missiles. So I just read the Office of the Director of National Intelligence 2021 UFO preliminary report. I read it as well as I could. It's pretty boring. And the main reason I disagree with Robert Hastings, Jeremy Corbell, and Carl Nell is because I feel like the report strived to hedge to such an extent that it really wasn't committing to a position. And I think had it committed to a position, the U.S. government would have been forced to answer many more questions about UAP. And by the constant hedging that the report partook in, it allowed people to basically come away from that report with whatever they want to come away with. Reading that report really does lead me to assess there is a UFO cover-up. It's a very suspicious report. But we'll go into that. Let me cover the parts of the report that were interesting that could allow you to come away with the perspective that the U.S. government was admitting to super advanced unknown craft. So from the 2021 Director of National Intelligence Office report, and I quote, "In a limited number of incidents, UAP reportedly appeared to exhibit unusual flight characteristics. These observations could be the result of sensor errors, spoofing, or observer misperception and require additional rigorous analysis." So appear, they love the word appear. And a handful of UAP appeared to demonstrate advanced technology. In 18 incidents described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics. Some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. In a small number of cases, military aircraft systems process radio frequency RF energy associated with UAP sightings. The UAPTF holds a small amount of data that appear to show UAP demonstrating acceleration or a degree of signature management. Additional rigorous analysis are necessary by multiple teams or groups of technical experts to determine the nature and validity of these data. We are conducting further analysis to determine if breakthrough technologies were demonstrated. So there's all these bins. There's several bins that the report puts UAP in. Obviously, clutter, trash, foreign adversaries. But the other bin is the most interesting one and the one that UAP would fall under. So this is what it says about the other bin. Other, and I quote, "Although most of the UAP described in our data set probably remain unidentified due to limited data or challenges to collection, processing, or analysis, we may require additional scientific knowledge to successfully collect on, analyze, and characterize some of them. We would group such objects in this category pending scientific advances that allowed us to better understand them. The UAPTF intends to focus additional analysis on the small number of cases where UAP appeared to display unusual flight characteristics or signature management." And then here's where it says, so some people said that, then I think they were alluding to this report, that the U.S. government openly acknowledged that UAP do not stem from adversaries. That's not completely correct. They're very cautious in the way they say that. So from the 2021 report, it says, "We currently lack data to indicate any UAP are part of a foreign collection program or indicative of a major technological advancement by a potential adversary." We currently lack data is a huge hedge. And then on the U.S. side, it says some cases could be attributable to U.S. development or classified programs, but they were unable to confirm that. So this report is just hedge city, right? They don't want to commit to anything. After reading it, honestly, it feels like a cover-up. It feels sketchy and suspicious, and I don't feel like that's because I have a big bias with the UFO issue. I think the report is suspicious, and I spoke to ChatGPT and I said to ChatGPT, why do I feel like the report gives me the impression that there's a cover-up going on? And this is what it said. For whatever it's worth, ChatGPT is a tool. If I use it in a little slice of my video, I think it's okay. This is what ChatGPT said. That feeling makes a lot of sense, and you're not alone. Here's why the 2021 ODNI preliminary assessment can give off cover-up vibes, even if you read it in the most objective way. 1, the hedged language. The report constantly hedges, appeared to, currently lack data, require further analysis. That's normal for intelligence writing, but when you're talking about objects that hover against the wind or move without propulsion, the constant downplaying feels like intentional avoidance. 2, the acknowledgement without acknowledgement pattern. It acknowledges UAP are real physical objects and sometimes show advanced characteristics, but then refuses to draw any conclusions. That we see it, but we can't say what it is stance feels suspicious because it sounds like they're deliberately stopping short of the obvious next step. 3, the data bottleneck. The report says most UAP data comes from U.S. Navy sources, that Air Force data was limited, and that stigmas kept reporting down. To a reader, that feels implausible, as if the government doesn't already have broader surveillance coverage or more definitive data tucked away. Back to me. Yeah, one of the biggest complaints about the 2021 ODNI preliminary assessment was that the Air Force gave no information, right? The Air Force, which should have the most information, more than the Navy, gave no information. Cover-up city. I'm sorry. The Navy, I think the reason the Air Force has been so reluctant to give over information on UAP is because they have the most information and they don't want to be held responsible for lying to the public. Now let's go to number 4, the other bin. They carve out 4 familiar categories: clutter, natural, U.S. programs, adversary systems, and then add a vague other. It's a bureaucratic way of acknowledging something beyond conventional explanation, but it comes off as like a placeholder for we know more than we're telling you. 5, the nuclear silence. As Robert Hastings pointed out, there's no mention of nuclear site incidents despite decades of veteran testimony. The absence feels conspicuous, which naturally fuels suspicion that they're avoiding the most sensitive cases. So why you feel cover-up vibes? Because the report is designed to acknowledge just enough to look transparent while hedging, limiting scope and omitting glaring areas of interest. That combination, selective candor plus silence, reads like classic information management rather than full disclosure. So I do agree with Carl Nell, Robert Hastings, and Jeremy Corbell in the sense that this is a huge departure and that the U.S. government has officially been more forthright and given UFOs more credibility than ever before within the history of the U.S. government. That is true. But they did it in a way that hedges so much that they're not explicitly saying that these are ultra-advanced craft and we don't know where they come from and they defy scientific understanding. They're not saying that simply because they hedged so much. And if they did not hedge and they said, yes, these are ultra-advanced craft far beyond anything we have in our inventory, and we don't know how they operate, what would be the result? The U.S. government would be inundated with endless questions, just as Carl Nell conveyed. Although Carl Nell framed it as we'd only be inundated with those questions, that is the U.S. government, if they said it explicitly that these objects stem from non-human intelligence. But what I'm saying is that if the 2021 ODNI report did not hedge as much as it did, those questions would still pour in, and we would be in a different world than we are now.
They don't want you asking any more questions, and I know that because we have fought tooth and nail.
But why? Why don't they want us to? It doesn't make sense.
Now it does make perfect sense once you hear the answer.
Tell me why.
Originally, back in the nuclear time, it was for strategic advantage. If you can get derivative, exploitative technology, so if you can exploit, well, almost there, if you can exploit any technologies for derivative technologies, just like how Russia will take and back engineer one of our bombers and figure it out, right? Then you have a strategic advantage. So I get it. Back in the day, why they didn't want us to know about this is because they thought, and this is documented.
During the Cold War.
Well, they thought first people would go crazy. Then that's been debunked. That like the War of the Worlds thing, nobody went crazy for that. Nobody went wild. Then they're like, maybe it'll upturn people's religious ideas. And they realized, no, it won't. Most religions are like inclusive of all of God's creations. So then they thought, well, this is really important. If we can get derivative technologies through exploitation of these craft, then we would have a strategic advantage. And whoever gets there first, they win. Because it's clear that these craft are operating off of a propulsion and energy system that is different than what we have as far as reactionary propulsion. So that I understand. I understand that back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that we needed to protect that information to exploit the actual craft and actual hardware and the propulsion systems that we have obtained, which we have, and you've been told by people in position to know very publicly, even the number of craft in the U.S. that they believe we have.
I'm going to be completely and utterly honest here. I really do think it's stupidly obvious that the U.S. government is lying about UFOs and covering up this scientific reality. And someone at some point needs to write a book about why the cover-up is so obvious. But of course, after disclosure, that book will be written. But here's the thing. When that book is written, it's going to be based on information that happened before disclosure, not after disclosure. And so when people say there's no evidence that we're not alone, my go-to retort is, well, if disclosure happens, then what you just said is just not very intelligent. I'm sorry. Because cover-ups of non-human intelligence and their craft leaves copious amounts of evidence behind. And you saying there was no evidence doesn't magically make that true. It might just mean that your judgment and assessment of the evidence that was there was very, very poor and had a lot to be desired. And I think that after disclosure, we're going to look back and say, why were all our greatest minds so convinced there was nothing to see here? I mean, one of the retorts that skeptics like to use is, well, it's just all stories, bruh. It's just all stories, bruh. Okay, but can we have some nuance here? Can we have some sophisticated thinking? Can we parse what really has been going on since the 40s? Yeah, something is just a story when it's isolated. And if someone comes to you and it's an isolated story and they there's no reason to assume they're credible and they weren't working for the government and they're not risking their neck or anything like that, fine, it's just a story. But when you have people coming out of the government and the military and from the intelligence community all saying the same thing, and this has been going on for decades and it's only heating up, and we have a hearing in 9 days and we're going to get 3 new whistleblowers and they're all saying the same thing and they're all claiming that they're getting harassed and threatened from coming forward. Why are they getting harassed and threatened from coming forward if there's nothing to see here? And members of Congress are saying it's like pulling teeth trying to get the U.S. government to be transparent about UFOs. Why are all these members of Congress from both the Democratic and the Republican Party saying the same thing if there's nothing to see here? And why are people witnessing the same shapes over many decades? Yes, I agree. Most UFO that people see are prosaic, but there are some cases throughout history that are very unambiguous where they see it up close and personal and they're all like the same shapes. The patterns emerge. So while I will contend, yes, there is no smoking gun evidence in the public domain, I think after disclosure, our historians are not going to be like, yeah, man, the skeptics were boss. They were just the greatest analysts you could ever imagine. No, I think they're going to say this is fascinating that they were so certain, right? And I use the word certain very intentionally. Skepticism is not a problem. I think there is a spectrum of reasonable analysis of the UFO topic, and being skeptical that we're not alone and being engaged by non-human intelligence is part of that very reasonable spectrum. But you don't see that from skeptics today. The Neil deGrasse Tysons, the Mick Wests, they are so certain. They are so absolutely certain, as near total certainty as you can be, that there's nothing to see here. And I think after disclosure, which I think is going to happen in our lifetime, historians are going to look back and say that was not really an intellectually responsible position to have. Skepticism is one thing. Near certainty is a completely different thing.
So Arrow, I got no love for them. Now the employees of Arrow, a lot of love for them.
Right.
Good folks in there. From the top down, they got a mandate. And I'm going to say it one last time because no one ever listens to me. And I've been saying this for years. There's one thing.
And we're listening.
To shape the emerging UAP narrative. That is a CIA mandate.
Wow.
About media and the UFOs. They have something, by the way, that they call perception management. It's a office, and they have a budget, and that's what they're trying to do.
According to Jeremy Corbell, there is a top-down mandate from the Central Intelligence Agency penetrating AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the office that Congress set up to get to the bottom of the UFO enigma, discover if there's a cover-up and so forth, that there's a mandate coming from the CIA infiltrating AARO, as I understand it, to shape the emerging UAP narrative through media regarding UFOs. Then he also said that there's a perception management office that has a budget and therefore is funded presumably by taxpayer dollars. Everyone has suspected that the CIA plays a central role in the cover-up. But if they have gone so far as to attempt to influence how American citizens perceive the topic, that would be an extraordinary bombshell secret coming to light if we ever get disclosure. Perhaps as explosive as the discovery that we're not alone. If that is true, I don't know if people realize how absolutely immoral that is, because they are taking advantage of the clandestine nature of UAP, right? They're taking advantage of the way UAP operate in our world. Because obviously if UAP operated in a way in which smoking gun evidence would inevitably be in the public domain, then you wouldn't have any viable way to have a perception management office, because we'd already know the full implications of what we're dealing with, that we're not alone, that they stem from non-human intelligence. So if there is a perception management office in the Pentagon, it is exploiting the way UAPs operate in our world and making it harder and less likely for humanity to figure out exactly what's going on. That is extraordinarily unethical. And I don't think people will respond well to that if we ever get disclosure. Which is why I've said in the past that disclosure is going to disturb people far more because of the lengths the U.S. government and other governments went to keep people off the path of truth. And that is going to disturb them more than learning we're not alone in the universe. And I think that's one of the big reasons the cover-up has persisted so long, is because, in particular, because that's the government I'm familiar with, the U.S. government has dug themselves such a deep hole, and they know it, that they're just never going to voluntarily tell the American public and the world at large that they've been executing disinformation campaigns and lying to the public. Now, in the third clip from this video, from the show, Shane Smith Has Questions, Jeremy Corbell went into why he thinks the cover-up persisted, what fueled it. He went from people managing the secrecy, they were concerned that people would go crazy, and then they were concerned that it would upturn people's religious ideas, and then they were very entrenched in the studying of UAP, trying to discern what they could learn and apply militarily, and they didn't want to talk about that publicly. And the impression I get from that clip that I already shared is that at this point, and for a very long time, they've spent enough time involved in the cover-up that they've long known for decades now that they don't need to lie to the public anymore, which is precisely why I think the real reason at this stage in the game that they're lying is because they've dug themselves such a big hole and they don't want to be held accountable. You know, in the early stages, they were probably freaked out, understandably so, and they didn't know what to do. And so the safest option, of course, was just to not talk about it. But you can't use that excuse indefinitely. And that excuse no longer holds any weight. And I want to say another thing, which I think is really interesting. Jeremy Corbell said that he's suspicious that there really are no crashes. That even when UAP go down and it appears it's a crash, it's really a donation. I've talked about this in depth before, and I myself have long been suspicious that there are any crashes. And why this is so interesting is because this might be another big reason that there is a cover-up. Because UFOs are not just appearing in our atmosphere and in our oceans, they are directly engaging us on a geopolitical level that is hard to wrap your head around. If all these crashes and landings are intentional, then they are intentionally allowing governments to gobble them up, to recover them, and study them in secrecy. And they're doing this with full knowledge that only governments are getting the craft and that the rest of society is not, which is why they're able to cover it up, and which is why our institutions have held the position that there's nothing to see here. If there was, we would know, right? If there was, we would know. That's their line of logic. But what if it's so much more complicated than that? What if there's a game going on where UFOs are concealing themselves in a very intentional and measured way so that we can have this debate in the public, but they're simultaneously allowing some institutions to have full knowledge of their reality, governments, militaries, aerospace corporations, and the intelligence agencies. And so this is what they would have to admit with disclosure. It wouldn't just be, we're not alone, UFOs represent non-human intelligence. It would be, oh, and by the way, whatever intelligences are behind UFOs, they are ceding their technology to various governments around the world. That's going to be a hard pill to swallow. And I don't know if that is indeed what's happening. I don't know if the U.S. government knows why. And if they do know why, they may not want to admit to it. And by the way, I'll remind you that UFO whistleblower David Grush has stated before Congress under oath that he thinks there might have been an agreement made between the U.S. government and the non-human intelligences.
You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
Okay, I can't ask when you think this occurred.
I'm editing the video right now, so that was the extent of what he said. I got that wrong. But outside of the hearing, I do recollect that he said to Ross Coulthart that there might have been an agreement between the U.S. government and non-human intelligences based upon things he learned during his investigation. And if so, that would explain a lot of why the U.S. government is so reluctant to come clean on this issue and is so aggressive in covering it up. Breaking that open is difficult. And then the U.S. government might be fearful, if they have made agreements with non-human intelligences, what will happen if they go against that agreement by being transparent about the topic? So we're dealing with a lot of complexity. However, it's not our job to be sympathetic with the hypothetical that they made an agreement. We are the ones being lied to. They need to come clean. If they made an agreement, well, that was a really stupid thing to do, and you made that bed, and you're going to lie in that bed. If you think the solution is to lie indefinitely because you made agreements with non-human intelligence, You got another thing coming because that's not viable, because the truth is going to come out one way or the other sooner or later, and you know it. So you might as well come out with the truth now to mitigate the blowback so that the government doesn't go down with your lies.
What I have learned is that we live in a dream, a carefully constructed reality. We make use of a science that is tightly controlled and suppressed and distorted. I think we are left behind.
Humans.
I think normies, the normal humans, the people have been left behind. Us. Mm-hmm. People need to understand that we might have freedom of speech, but that has been subverted. We do not have freedom of inquiry. We are blocked from learning what we need to know. Just in the public world, we are blocked from advancing in science. We are taught false science intentionally to prevent us from learning more. We live in the Matrix. It's just much more boring than the movie.
I love how UFO whistleblower Matthew Brown says, we may have freedom of speech, but we don't have freedom of inquiry. That is really profound and really captures, I think, the theme and structure of this video itself. If we're living under a cover-up, then we are not able to ask questions about our place in the universe, because consensus reality is that our place in the universe is that we are alone. And, even former Colonel Carl Nell in the clip I shared earlier said, like, disclosure would lead to endless questions. And I think that's part of what the government doesn't want. They don't want to be inundated with questions about this enigma. So the cover-up is an infinitely easier policy for the government to maintain, at least in the short term. In the long term, it's an infinitely more treacherous policy, because the blowback is going to be so much bigger if they keep persisting with the lies and demonstrate that they're not part of the solution, that they're part of the problem. Now, I wrote a tweet very recently that, and I quote, I wrote it 3 hours ago, actually. You can't adjust what you can't see. UFO disclosure facilitates us seeing what was unseen. The cover-up is playing God. I do think disclosure would lead to extraordinary adjustment within human civilization on so many different levels. I really believe that. I think it would trigger us to question a lot of the aspects of our society that we just take for granted. Endless wars, forever wars, constant wars, and many other issues that are just entrenched in society. I think that disclosure would be a wake-up call and would trigger us to ask questions, not just about our place in the universe, but about whether we are living as a civilization the best that we can. It would be the ultimate pattern interrupt. What could interrupt our pattern more than learning we're not alone? And pattern interrupts are powerful. They're spiritually powerful. They're psychologically powerful. And the lack of freedom of inquiry regarding our place in the universe is because we collectively assume that there's nothing to see here. And as I said earlier, the U.S. government and other governments, they are exploiting the clandestine nature of UAP. There could be no cover-up if UAP were more unambiguous with how they interact with humanity. And yeah, I think it will be very difficult for governments to answer questions like, well, do you think all these crashes that have happened over the decades are intentional? And how do we know, you're telling us the truth if you claim that you did not make any agreements with non-human intelligences. Like, the government doesn't want to deal with this, especially if they've made agreements with non-human intelligences. Like, how do you deal with a topic like this that is so wild and mysterious and such a break away from what we thought we knew about how the world works? It's a mess. It is an existential mess of incomprehensible weight and gravity. So I understand why governments would not be running to break the news to the public. But ultimately, at the same time, this comes down to control. It doesn't come down to care or love or protection. No, they're protecting themselves from the consequences of disclosure. They're not protecting us. And anyone that tells you that they're so worried about how society is going to respond and they need to not tell society so that we can have a peaceful civilization I just think they're being very biased, in my opinion, because even if you were to argue that it would challenge religions and it would be disruptive, it would also open up wonder like never before. So you can't look at it just through the lens of, oh, it would be disruptive, oh my God. That's not balance. That's not objectivity. Yes, it would be disruptive, but it would also expose us to a degree of wonder that we have never, ever tasted before. And the cover-up has ensured that we never tasted that. Now we live in a completely different universe. The second after disclosure, we all live in a completely different universe. A universe where governments might have had communication with non-human intelligences and didn't tell the rest of the world. A universe where non-human intelligences may have been crashing technologies and intentionally landing them over decades as gifts to governments to see what they do with them. I mean, that's mind-blowing. That's mind-blowing, is it not? A universe where there might be civilizations in our oceans, whether they come from other planets or they're native to this planet but have kind of broken away from human civilization hundreds of thousands of years ago, or they're from other worlds but they came here 10,000 years ago, or whatever. Like, that would light a fire. Like, being suddenly in an environment where all of these potentialities could be true because there is a non-human intelligence here, would light a fire underneath all of us. It would give us all meaning. It would give us all purpose. It would, because now we would all be obligated to figure out what's going on from a scientific standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from a self-preservation standpoint. We would collectively be on a new adventure. And yet there are people in powerful places who have decided that they are not going to broach this topic, in my opinion. And they've kept 8 billion people from having a flame of inspiration being lit underneath their arses. And I think that's wrong. I think that is unthinkable. And I really think disclosure would be unifying, but it would also, it would give us a glimpse into something that we just never had a glimpse into before. We would start asking questions we never asked before. We would start having conversations that we never had before. We would all of humanity would be on the same team, at least in terms of, we got to figure this out. The populace, the citizenry of Russia would be on the page of, we got to figure this out. The citizenry of China would be on the page of, we got to figure this out. The citizenry of the United States would be on the page of, we got to figure this out. The citizenry of Bolivia would be on the page of, we need to figure this out. And we would all unite through that collective mission. It would be such a beautiful time. It would be profound and it would be fascinating. And there are people in places of power who do not want that transition. And I believe they don't want it for selfish reasons, not for reasons of national security or concern for the stability of the world. They don't want to be held accountable. They don't want a spotlight being turned on that is directed toward those who were part of the gatekeeping and held all the secrets about this topic. It's time for the truth to come out. And I tip my hat to every whistleblower that has come out so far and those that are going to come out, because without you, the U.S. government would have no pressure to stop the lies. The cover-up would be indefinite, but you have changed the trajectory for all of humankind. And I tip my hat. You are not only a patriot of this country, of the United States of America, you are a warrior fighting on behalf of all of mankind. I was going to play a clip with Jake Barber, but this video has gone on long enough. We'll harness that clip in another video. Please do not forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you could become a patron. You could become a YouTube member. You could give me a one-time donation. All those potentialities can access in the description box below. Or you can slap a like on this bad boy, and I'd appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. My brain, man, feels so good today. Thank you, God. And I'll see you next time. Special thanks to all YouTube members, patrons, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.